Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 28, 2023.
Thank you and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So, for more than 30 years, let me just say the name of my paper is The Cognitive Disconnect of Goddess Spirituality. And for more than 30 years, I thrived and suffered in women's and mixed gender alternative spirituality circles, covens, temples, and groups. I won't name places or names, but trust me when I say many were and still are at the top of the heap in terms of size and influence. I'll tell you that I founded and ran a 501c3 for 10 years, became an ordained interfaith minister, organized and led sacred international tours, wrote 7 books, and was on the board of several of these groups. As you said, I've been named one of the 13 most influential women in goddess spirituality and a wisdom keeper of the goddess spirituality movement, and was bestowed an honorary doctorate of ministry for the service I provided the community over the years. Now, I tell you this not to tout my accomplishments or respect within the community, but say it only so you know I was in the thick of things for most of these 3 decades, and you can be confident I've seen much. I speak from much personal and friend-adjacent experience. I also want to say before I begin, I thought long and hard before I wrote this paper for fear of how it might be received among my peers. Whistleblowers aren't popular. Everyone has their own truth these days. People have selective memory and may even wear blinders, but truths are important and must be told. So what I tell you today, believe me when I say I share all this with a heavy heart. I'm not sharing my experiences and observations to out people or groups, but to shine a light and be transparent so awareness is raised. So changes might be considered and acted upon so something better might grow. Because I do believe values and virtues of the sacred feminine are what can save the world if we clean up our act. And before I get into more specifics, let me also say I'm not one to let perfection stand in the way of progress. Not one of us is perfect. We're all flawed. I'd like to think most of us were and are doing our best, some of us to be in service to the community. In hindsight, I don't regret anything I experienced in these communities, good and bad. It was all food for growth, and the movement had to start somewhere, and hopefully will grow into more maturity in the coming decades. I also know how thankless it can be to be a leader in the community, with members having no idea the financial, emotional, psychological, or energetic burden it is to wear the mantle of leadership. There's always someone ready to chop off the leader's head if they stumble or misspeak. There are the members with the arrogant certainty they could have done it all better, yet they never step up and do anything. Then there are the attendees or members that seem to be there to be a rebel, sticking it to their family for the shock value, or they come to be entertained, expecting you or your group to outdo yourself in every succeeding ritual or season. Did I say it often felt thankless? Well, yes. And these are all the ingredients of the recipe: bitter, sweet, savory, simmering on the fire to make the stew that is the alternative spirituality community cauldron in which I lived. So I began my journey within goddess spirituality among both Dianic groups, many who were lesbian, who only recognized and practiced with the feminine face of God. Later, I simultaneously worked with non-Dianic groups who were also inclusive of male deities, and these welcomed my husband within their ranks, who was the wind beneath my wings and a devotee of Isis and Anubis. While I owe a huge debt of gratitude to these groups, I liken them to a sometimes abusive, dysfunctional family that simultaneously nurtures and scars us. But even the wounds offer opportunities for growth if we respond in a healthy way. In the hands of Dianic women, I transformed from a Fox News listener into an ecofeminist devotee to a feminine face of God, at first as deity and archetype, and later as virtues and ideals. I learned about alternative healing modalities, ritual, mythology, magic, comparative religions, archaeology, anthropology, sacred pilgrimage, social justice. I made many good friends I still have to this day. Without this group coming from the sexist and racist Bible Belt, I'm confident I would never have discovered the path of sacred feminine liberation theology, which has been at the center of my life. But looking back, the teachings as they exist or existed among those within my many orbits were also lacking. Thanks to a good friend I'll just call Sue, who left goddess spirituality because she felt it lacked substance, I started looking at the teachings through a different lens for myself, and I started digging deeper and not just settling for the questionable behaviors I witnessed or what I saw was being taught. I'll give you some examples. I will admit I saw goddess spirituality different than some other women. To me, it was a potential antidote to the world's woes. It was a big umbrella for everyone. Under the broad umbrella of goddess, I can see we find many faces across continents and cultures with no mandate that we worship one name, one face. Instead, we see, or I see, a metaphor for plurality, diversity, and inclusion in the loving and life-affirming sacred feminine, rather than the jealous, one-way, androcentric, and exclusionary God of man-made patriarchy. Those embracing goddess might easily see choosing peace, tolerance, gender equality, and acceptance of people of all walks of life, gay, straight, and trans, people of all skin colors and religions, or no religion at all, as being in alignment with her diversity, resulting in a more inclusive, just, equal, balanced, and sustainable world and society. Therefore, to me, the bar for behavior and teaching was high. If we believe these things, we should certainly walk our talk if we were indeed serious about goddess spirituality. In contrast, others saw it as a private sanctuary where they might escape patriarchy and the androcentric God, where women could feel valued, even superior. I get that. I did it. I was there. They felt women were entitled to their own spaces where no man or non-woman born woman dare tread. They would feel the need to cleanse spaces of male energy if they entered one previously occupied by men. The irony was, some of these women exuded more male energy than many of the men I know, but that was overlooked. They wanted goddess spirituality to be based on the sanctity of women's bodies, and if you didn't have a female body, you were excluded. If truth be told, many didn't care much if men dropped off the face of Mother Earth. But there were those of us with sons or wonderful husbands feeling we must choose between our families and this spirituality we loved. How could you exclude the other species on the planet and believe this spirituality was about love and inclusion, compassion, and empathy? This created tension. The work of Z. Budapest, an early leader in the movement, got cherry-picked. While Z advocated for the sanctity of women's bodies and wrote about working with men, such as in her pan groups, others chose to ignore this male-inclusive reality. When Z ordained a man, it didn't go over well at all. The cognitive disconnect between the values and the essence of goddess, namely love, inclusion, and equality, were disregarded if women wanted to exclude or discriminate against men and trans persons. They're out there now, being used as tools, spreading hate and exclusion, touting right-wing think tank ideas. Some even appeared on the Tucker Carlson show about the erasure of women when we're talking about less than 1% of the population being trans. They're aligning with people who would burn them at the stake, yet feel the end justifies the means. They're upset about labels like lactating person, replacing the label woman, But they weren't upset when the postman became postal worker or the military changed their manuals so they included language to include both sexes and couldn't be called sexist. There were no worries about the erasure of men back then. And let's be real, it's patriarchy that's been erasing women for thousands of years, not the movement to include trans people. And I want to repeat that. It's patriarchy that's been erasing women or trying to for thousands of years. Look, the trans issue is a complicated subject, and I don't mean to simplify it. It's a topic for another entire paper and discussion. But I have to point out the myths where goddess embodied both genders. Those are conveniently disregarded. Also ignored were the many artifacts of goddess where she displayed genitals of both genders. They ignored the wide spectrum of gender. Kabeli's castrated male devotees, India's spiritual trans class that worship goddess, as well as the myths and artifacts that should make trans people our allies rather than adversaries. The Smith's College class, Psychology of Political Activism, Women Changing the World, actually points out how some women get stuck in the female superiority aspects of goddess spirituality and never evolve out of it, when they, in fact, should be ahead of the curve with behaviors indicative of values of goddess rather than acting out patriarchal or conservative values and practices, creating these cognitive disconnects they seem to choose not to see. But moving on. Likewise, during the Trump administration, it came to light many of the women within goddess spirituality were voting for Republicans, not connecting the dots between that political party's disregard for Mother Earth, climate change, and immigrants, and their desire to destroy democracy, the social safety net, and the rights of women and voters, all of which would have been paramount issues to defend and expand if one were walking the talk of a goddess advocate. It was clear many members within goddess spirituality never learn or take seriously social justice and how it relates to goddess, with even some advocates identifying as feminists seeming to really only care if white women got their piece of the patriarchal pie. The cognitive disconnect was and is often blinding. The path was and can be abusive and cruel rather than loving and inclusive. There was often selfishness and competition rather than connection and cooperation. There was little care for one another. Could that be because most women are already on the brink of burnout all the time, caring for families, aging parents, trying to have something for themselves or earn enough money to feed their families? That patriarchy strategy divides women? There are two sad stories I'll share about that. When a circle sister of mine went to the leader of our group in crisis, fearful of major surgery the next day, looking for some assurance, some compassion, she got none. The leader told her she was sorry she couldn't help her, despite the fact she'd been in service to the leader's group for years. She told her when something like that occurs in her life, she goes to her minister for comfort. Her minister, her male minister, not goddess clergy. What about just being a human being with empathy toward another human being if she didn't think her mantle of leadership might include counseling a member of her group? Example 2. I reached out, I was made aware of a sister who reached out to a woman who she'd known for 2 decades for a ride home from the hospital after major surgery. The woman didn't work, she had no family to care for, but her response was, "Can't you tough it out and drive yourself home?" Then myself, my personal experience. When I was recovering from a stun gun assault and my husband from his brain injury, which happened simultaneously, barely anyone from my community picked up the phone to see if we were alive or dead. And Roy, my husband, and I had enjoyed a rather big presence in the community. I guess it's like being the blonde girl. Everybody thinks she's got lots of dates. Meanwhile, no one's calling. Or out of sight, out of mind. I have to tell you, there are few or no care committees in goddess spirituality. The best you might get are the promise of thoughts and prayers, and we know how empty those can be these days, especially during a crisis. The spirituality needs self-reflection and overhaul, consistency and substance. In some cases, it needs to move away from the exclusionary goddess fundamentalism. I think if the leaders or elders in the community had better role models themselves, things might have been different. But this is a relatively new spirituality I've likened to a teenager in its developmental stage. And it's a major problem that everyone isn't reading from one book, like Christians have the New Testament and clear teachings of Jesus. In many places, it's more important which color candle we use on the altar rather than the social justice or ethical aspects of goddess spirituality. Sex magic is always the big draw at the conferences or fairs, rather than topics that might encourage more mature values or leadership or evolution as a better human being. I experienced the practice of patriarchy in a skirt, where the group rails against the sins of patriarchy, but then uses patriarchal methods and practices to solve problems or run groups. They would regularly shout down with the patriarchy, with not much of an idea how to bring it down or what might take its place, or who they needed in political office to help that cause. There was a lot of women's inhumanity to women as people brought their own trauma and baggage into groups without leaders equipped to recognize these problems and counsel or lead in a healthier way, and it resulted in many problems too numerous to name. There was the power-deprived leader marginalized in the male-dominated world who perhaps started a group to feed her own narcissistic needs or develop an income stream rather than teach spiritual values. It sometimes seemed more important to get a following, fill a class, sell a book, than take a risk and really try to suggest to someone they might think about if the elected official they voted for was going to strengthen the social safety net and protect women, Mother Earth, or the least among us. But that self-interest, or maybe lack of awareness, well, it's small potatoes compared to what's passing for Christian teaching these days in some places, with prosperity gospels, pray away the gay camps, and rich billionaires feeding dark money to the Supreme Court. In defense of those teaching goddess spirituality, trying to sell a book or fill a class, they usually have no institutional backing or rich angel donors. The majority of the followers may be women who still suffer from wage disparity, and 70% of women still retire in poverty. And their students might have a hard time coming up with money to attend a ritual, and even complain to their leaders that they aren't doing everything in the community for free. Fortunately, with Sue's departure uppermost in my mind, I sought out teachers like Rianne Eisler, Carol Christ, and Merlin Stone, who made the pivot to social justice while maintaining that connection to goddess values. I shifted beyond local politics and practices of dis-ease and did my best to evolve in spite of the aforementioned pitfalls. I sought out and found substance and depth, sometimes on my own, using critical thinking and extrapolation between myths, archetypes, and values. I became a power of partnership leader and caring economics teacher. I was vetted to speak at the Parliament of World Religions and the American Academy of Religion on topics at the crossroads of social justice, goddess, and personal transformation. I had a podcast for more than a decade, interviewing a vast array of foremothers and way showers, men as well as women, inside and outside the pagan community, all allies whose values easily align under the goddess umbrella. And believe me, I took a hit from some goddess women who didn't think I should give men a platform for their wisdom, even if they were our allies. I published books, the most recent being about how society is rife with trauma we do not recognize and abuses we do not reject, titled Normalizing Abuse, a commentary on our culture of pervasive abuse. I've also led sacred tours, and following my mentors, made the pivot to social justice work. But everybody doesn't make these leaps. But as leaders, we must encourage this growth in our communities. We must challenge the people in our communities to stretch themselves. Just as we call on progressive Christians to right their ship, we too must be willing to look at what prevents our spirituality from being taken seriously and adjust. The Pew Institute cites people leaving organized religion in great numbers, opting instead for spirituality. Goddess spirituality taught with substance, particularly the substance of social justice, true love, caring, inclusion, nurturing, and compassion, can provide a healthy alternative to these people. But to get there, to transform Goddess spirituality, transparency is imperative if we are to grow the spiritual path into the powerful influence it might be for the benefit of the planet and humankind. It is so much more than a sanctuary for females. Women and their like-minded brothers must examine the values of the sacred feminine and transition it out of the realm of alternative spirituality. But first, we must be willing to see our flaws, the misuse, and even the abuse, and provide the leadership to remedy our own mistakes and misconceptions. We must transform our people using her archetypes and ideals because the sleeping goddess when the sleeping goddess is awakened, mountains will move. Thank you very much for the time.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, President and Fellows of Harvard College.